Welcome back to Outside Views. Today we're diving into the thorny and increasingly urgent issue of fishing rights as the EU and the UK prepare for another round of post-Brexit negotiations. With the existing trade and cooperation deal between the UK and the EU set to expire in 2026, it's no secret that fishing rights are about to take center stage once more. For many in the UK, fishing rights were a key reason for supporting Brexit, an industry that became symbolic of British sovereignty and control over British waters. But now, as the Labour government looks to reset relations with the EU, there's a palpable sense of apprehension among British fishermen and government officials alike. The big fear? That Labour might concede fishing rights in exchange for an improved trade deal with the EU. Now, let's unpack this complex issue. Back when the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or TCA, was signed, it included a provision that transferred 25% of the existing EU fishing quota in UK waters back to the UK. This was set to happen over a period of 5.5 years, leading up to a transition point in June 2026. After that, negotiations were meant to take place annually, leaving room for multi-year deals, but without guaranteeing any continuity. So in essence, while some quotas were returned to the UK, the arrangement was always going up to be for debate again in 2026. In recent reports, Brussels has been preparing a list of so-called offensive interests that they intend to bring to the table with the new Labour government. And right up there on the list is access to British waters, a priority pushed forward particularly by France. This isn't surprising given that the French fishing industry is heavily reliant on access to UK waters for its livelihood. With this renewed push, many in the EU want to negotiate a deal that provides multi-annual stability rather than the current precarious annual negotiations on the horizon. A move towards this kind of arrangement could offer more predictability, but it would also mean that the UK would have to give up further control over its waters. A specialist fisheries committee designed to oversee and manage the TCA agreement has been tasked with meeting 3 times a year. And this committee has become a focal point for these ongoing disputes and is where much of the groundwork for the upcoming negotiations is expected to take place. One of the underlying concerns from the EU side, and particularly from countries like France, is that Britain's marine protection areas are where much of the valuable fish stocks are found. For French fishers and others, these waters represent prime fishing grounds. The Times even reported back in June that some EU officials predicted that fishing would be a top priority in trade talks with the UK once Labour came into power. As one European bureaucrat put it, if a new UK government wants better trade talks, countries like France would make sure that these talks are tied to fisheries. In essence, the EU wants Britain to grant more access to EU fishers as part of any broader renegotiation on trade terms. Now, why is this such a sticking point? It's because fishing rights and access to UK waters has become a kind of a symbol for both sovereignty and economic security. For British fishermen, Brexit was supposed to bring more control, more fish, and ultimately more revenue. But many feel that they've been left with empty promises because no one talked about access for the fish to EU markets. And looking at some numbers, the UK's fishing industry has faced a complex journey since Brexit. In 2022, UK vessels landed approximately 640,000 tons of sea fish with a value of more than £1 billion. And while that may sound significant, this actually represented a 2% drop in quantity compared to the previous year, despite a 13% rise in value due to increased fish prices. On the other hand, landings by foreign vessels into the UK also fell by 4% on 2021's figures. It's worth noting that the UK is in fact a net importer of fish. In 22, the UK had a trade gap of around 316,000 tons, a slight improvement from the previous year's 322,000 tons. So despite gaining a portion of EU quotas, the UK fishing industry still grapples with the realities of the post-Brexit landscape. And Labour's new position in government has many wondering if they will deliver on their promises to defend their fishing rights without yielding too much in trade negotiations. Labour's campaign stance was clear. They pledged not to rejoin the single market, the customs union, or restore freedom of movement. But they also expressed a desire to deepen ties with Brussels. And this dual message has led to concern, particularly among coastal communities, that Labour may find itself in a position where it must make concessions. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer previously stated that he understood the importance of fishing rights for British communities. And during the campaign, he emphasized that his government would not let these communities down or trade away their rights. Yet, British fishermen feel they've been misled before and trust is low. These communities were promised a post-Brexit fishing boom, but many feel that the deal they got didn't deliver. And now they fear being used as a bargaining chip in a larger reset of the EU-UK relations. And another layer to this issue is the political dimension in Europe itself. While the European Commission conducts the negotiations, individual member states like France, Spain, and Denmark have powerful fishing lobbies pushing hard for access to British waters. Fishing for these countries isn't just about the economy. It's about tradition, culture, and regional livelihoods. For France especially, fishing is a matter of national pride, and losing access to UK waters could create political fallout for leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron has been outspoken about defending French fishers' rights to access UK waters. And in the past, tensions even led to near confrontations between British and French boats in contested fishing areas. And this goes to show how sensitive this issue remains, not only for the UK, but also for several EU countries. And as we approach 2026, it's increasingly likely that tensions over fishing rights will rise again, perhaps to levels we haven't seen since the early Brexit debates. For the UK government, particularly under Labour, the balancing act will be a tough one. They want to improve economic ties with the EU and solidify trade deals, but at what cost? The demands for access to UK waters could very well become the deciding factor in whether the EU moves forward with any new agreements. And the push for a multi-annual deal, as the EU is likely to pursue, could offer stability, but would simultaneously tie the UK into a less flexible arrangement with the EU. And some British diplomats and officials are already raising alarm bells about this potential trade-off. In fact, British diplomats were reportedly quite concerned earlier this year when the EU, under pressure from France, began actively pushing for fishing talks and even triggered a dispute mechanism over UK marine environmental protections. For many in the fishing industry, this feels like a déjà vu, a sense that they are on the verge of being compromised once again. So, what's next? The likelihood is that the debate will intensify in the coming months as both sides lay out their demands and they prepare for what will undoubtedly be a contentious negotiation period. Both the UK and the EU have interests that go beyond just fishing, but it's clear that fishing rights will be front and center as a political battleground. The Labour government will need to tread carefully if they want to maintain support from those coastal communities and the fishing groups that feel they were promised a brighter future post-Brexit. But if you want fish, you need a market. At the end of the day, the future of fishing rights in UK waters will likely become a litmus test for Labour's ability to stand firm in these negotiations and for the EU's willingness to recognise the UK's sovereignty over its waters. In 2026, the stakes will be high and both sides will need to find common grounds without compromising the values and promises they've made to their citizens. But that also includes protecting the EU market. And one thing is certain, The next chapter in Brexit's legacy is yet to be written, and fishing rights are shaping up to be a major part of that story. And if you want to see another video, the next one is right here in the end screen.